$1,380 per ounce. That's what Rick Ness's crew cost him. $820. That's what Parker Schnabel's crew cost him. The $560 gap wasn't about the ground. It was about the people. Rick's crew was loyal, hardworking, and dedicated, but they were also expensive, inefficient, and untrained. Parker's crew was a well-oiled machine. Every person knew their role. Every task was optimized. Every dollar was accounted for. Rick looked at his crew, then at Parker's numbers, and felt something he had never felt before: envy. Not of Parker's gold, but of Parker's efficiency. The cost gap wasn't a betrayal, but it felt like one. Rick had trusted his crew, had paid them well, had treated them fairly, and they were costing him millions. Let me take you back to the moment Rick first saw the numbers, back to when the cost gap became real. Rick was sitting in his office, reviewing the end-of-season financials. His accountant had laid out the numbers in cold, hard columns: revenue, expenses, profit. Rick scanned the pages, looking for the bottom line. Then he saw it. His cost per ounce, $1,380. Parker's cost per ounce, $820, a difference of $560. Rick stared at the numbers, unable to believe what he was seeing. His hands started shaking. His heart started pounding. Do you believe that numbers can hurt? Rick learned that they can. $560 per ounce was a knife in his chest. Rick called his foreman into the office and showed him the spreadsheet. The foreman stared at the numbers, his face going pale. "Boss, this can't be right." Wickles, watching interviews and talking to people who had worked with Parker. The picture that emerged was painful. $80. Parker's is $820. That is a gap of $560. I need every one of you to think about how we can reduce costs and how we can close the gap. Because if we don't... The crew started making changes, small at first, turning off machines when they weren't being used, mining at $820 per ounce. Rick was still above $1,300. The difference was still hundreds of dollars, still millions per season. Do you think Rick Ness ever slept during this period? His crew says barely. He was obsessed with the numbers. Rick started analyzing every aspect of his operation, breaking down every cost and questioning every expense. The fuel bill was too high. The maintenance costs were too high. The labor costs were too high. Everything was too high. Rick felt like he was drowning in expenses, like he couldn't catch a break, like the universe was conspiring against him. Personally, I think Rick was learning that efficiency isn't accidental. It is engineered. Every dollar saved is the result of a decision. Every cost reduced is the result of a change. The crew was struggling. The pressure was getting to them. They were working longer hours, taking fewer breaks, and making fewer mistakes, but the costs weren't dropping fast enough. Some of them started to resent Rick, started to feel like he was blaming them for things that weren't their fault. The tension grew, the silence grew, the operation started to crack. How many of you have ever been part of a team that was under so much pressure that it started to break? Rick called another crew meeting. He stood in front of his people, exhausted and frustrated, and told them the truth. "I know this is hard. I know you are tired. I know you feel like I'm blaming you. I'm not. I'm trying to save this operation. I'm trying to make sure we are still mining 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I need your help. I need your ideas. I need you to tell me what we are doing wrong. What would you have done if your boss admitted that he needed your help?" The crew started talking, suggesting ideas, and offering solutions. One crew member suggested changing the maintenance schedule. Another suggested buying fuel in bulk. Another suggested training new crew members more thoroughly. Rick listened, took notes, and implemented the best ideas. The costs started dropping faster: $1,340 per ounce, $1,330, $1,320. Tell me your age if you have ever been part of a team that solved a problem together, but the gap was still huge. Parker was mining at $820. Rick was still $500 higher. The difference was still millions. Rick started to wonder if he could ever close the gap, if Parker was just better, and if Rick would always be second best. Do you think Rick Ness ever doubted himself? His crew says yes, often, but he never showed it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rick's foreman had been keeping a log of every breakdown, every delay, and every wasted hour. He brought the log to Rick. "Boss, look at this. Most of our downtime is caused by the same 3 problems. If we fix those, we cut our downtime in half." Rick studied the log. His foreman was right. The same problems kept occurring over and over, costing them money, costing them time, and costing them the chance to close the gap. What would you have done if you discovered that most of your problems were caused by the same 3 issues? The twist in the cost gap story came when Rick visited Parker's operation, not to spy but to learn. Parker had invited him, had offered to show him around, and had offered to share his secrets. Rick was nervous, embarrassed, and ashamed. He didn't want Parker to know how badly he was struggling, but he went anyway. Do you believe in learning from your competitors? Rick learned that Parker was willing to teach. Parker greeted Rick at the entrance to his operation, showed him around, introduced him to his crew, and explained his methods. Rick was impressed. Parker's operation was a well-oiled machine. Every person knew their role. Every task was optimized. Every dollar was accounted for. Rick asked the question that had been haunting him. How do you keep your costs so low? Personally, I think Parker saw the pain in Rick's eyes, understood what he was going through, and had been there himself. Parker answered honestly, "It's not about the machines, it's about the people. I hire slowly, I train thoroughly, I trust my crew to make decisions, I don't micromanage, I don't second-guess. I let them do their jobs." Rick listened, nodded, and took notes. Parker continued, "You have a good crew, Rick. They are loyal and hardworking, but they are not trained, not efficient, and not confident. You need to invest in them, train them, and trust them. How many of you have ever had a competitor who was also a mentor?" Rick drove back to his operation, thinking about Parker's words. He had been so focused on cutting costs that he had forgotten to invest in his people. He had been so focused on saving money that he had forgotten to spend it wisely. Stunned and hopeful, some of them had been thinking about quitting, had been updating their resumes, and had been looking for other jobs, but Rick's words gave them hope. Maybe things would change. The breakthrough came 3 months later. Rick's crew had been training for weeks, learning, improving, and growing. The costs had dropped to $1,200 per ounce, still higher than Parker's $820, but moving in the right direction. Rick gathered the crew in the mess tent and showed them the numbers. "We are making progress, not fast enough, but we are moving in the right direction. I'm proud of you. Keep working, keep learning, and keep improving. Tell me your age if you have ever been part of a team that turned itself around." The crew cheered, not loudly and not enthusiastically, but they cheered because they could see the progress, could feel the improvement, and could believe that the cost gap might actually close someday. Rick looked at his crew, at the people who had stayed, who had learned, and who had grown, and felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope. What would you have done if your team finally started believing in themselves? The costs continued to drop. $1,180 per ounce, $1,150, $1,120. Parker was still at $820. The gap was still $300, but it was closing slowly and painfully. Rick started to believe that he could actually compete, that he could actually close the gap, and that he could actually become as efficient as Parker. Do you think Rick Ness ever compared himself to Parker? Every day, it drove him crazy, but it also drove him to improve. The season ended. The final numbers were in. Rick's cost per ounce, $1,050. Parker's $820. The gap was $230, less than half of what it had been at the beginning of the season. Rick stood in the weigh room, staring at the numbers, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in the gold, but in the improvement. The final numbers from the cost gap analysis were confirmed. Rick Ness had started the season at $1,380 per ounce. He had ended at $1,050, a reduction of $330. Parker Schnabel had stayed steady at $820. The gap had closed from $560 to $230. Not victory but progress, not success but hope. Do you think Rick Ness was satisfied with the improvement? He was, but he wasn't done. The gap was still there, and Rick was still chasing it. Rick gathered his crew in the mess tent for the end-of-season celebration. He stood in front of them. They are tired, not when they are frustrated, and not when the gap seems impossible to close. Do you believe that Rick Ness will one day mine as efficiently as Parker Schnabel? Rick believes it. His crew believes it. And after this season, everyone else is starting to believe it too. Because Rick Ness doesn't quit, doesn't give up, and doesn't let the cost gap define him. He learns, he grows, he improves, and he closes the gap $1 at a time, 1 ounce at a time, 1 season at a time. The real cost gap wasn't between Rick and Parker. It was between the miner Rick was and the miner he wanted to become. And that gap was closing every single day.